Hello. So my name is Dr. Caroline Wabizer. I'm here in the Communication Studies Department at Sam Houston State University, and I am interviewing Val Rubinsky today. You just want to give a brief introduction?
Yeah, I'm Dr. Valerie Rubinsky. Most people call me Val. I'm an assistant professor of communication in the social science program at the University of Maine, Augusta, as well as the trauma-informed emergency management program here.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And to get started, can you tell me a little bit about your background and how you got into the communication field?
Sure. Well, my undergraduate degree was in journalism and, a related field. And I worked in it for a little while and didn't really feel like it was for me once I was actually doing the job. And so I went to get a master's degree in communication management and stakeholder relations to make a transition into public relations, which is a relatively common career transitions for folks who work in journalism. And while I was in my master's program, I was taking research methods classes because everyone has to usually in a master's program. And I discovered I really enjoyed doing research and decided that's kind of the direction I wanted to go in. And I was taking classes in interpersonal communication and communication theory and really enjoying those areas as well. So that's kind of what led me down that path. And I just kind of stuck with it.
So kind of related to that and what we've talked about earlier, can you tell us a little bit about your own research interests and what you do in the field?
Yeah. So I primarily study sexual communication. I like to say that I sort of study the umbrella of communication and intimacy and look at how people use communication to form and maintain and sometimes end intimate relationships, as well as family relationships. So both how people talk to their partners about sex, relationships, and identity, and then how families kind of communicate about and socialize people into those subject areas. Currently, I'm working on a study about how people disclose former relational histories of sexual or relational abuse to new non-abusive partners, and some work on image-based sexual abuse, so like non-consensual sexting or revenge porn, those kinds of subject areas.
What drew you to this research area?
Mhm.
What got you into it?
Sure. So I think that sex is an important subject, and I think I've always been interested, just personally interested in the fact that my experiences as either a queer person or a person who grew up in a household that sex was talked about a lot were different from my friends and peers who didn't have those same experiences as me. So partly I was interested in sort of why is the way that I talk about sex different from the way that a lot of people I know talk about it, and does it matter that it is? And pretty quickly I learned that it matters, but the why it's different and what particular experiences aren't necessarily represented as much in our knowledge about sexual communication were sort of interest to me. It was sort of a parallel discussion of like things that were happening in my personal life I was taking interpersonal communication classes, which I don't think it's horribly controversial to say is a somewhat heteronormative part of our discipline, and not really feeling like my experiences were especially represented in what I was reading about. And so I think like many people, I wanted to start doing research to represent my own experience in an area I wasn't seeing it. And it sort of evolved out of there. I don't study too much of my own kind of relational experiences anymore, but I have been interested in studying the experiences of people in relationships we don't see typically represented. And rather than sort of viewing that as a problem, which is sort of how we've historically approached any kind of deviation from more normative relational models, as what can we kind of learn from different ways of doing relationships, and what can it teach everybody else who doesn't necessarily do their relationships that way.
Yeah, that's really cool. What has been your favorite research project so far?
Oh, I don't know that I have a favorite. I really enjoyed working on a project I worked with a sort of small virtual lab called the Intimate Communication Lab. And we worked on a project a few years ago looking at period sex conversations. And that one was a particularly fun project. And it was a survey study, I believe, if I'm remembering. It was a few years back now. So I might be forgetting my exact methodology. But I know I really loved doing the analysis and sort of talking with the research team about their own experiences, because we were all like sort of a group of women who were really related, I think, a lot to our participants and the discussions they were having around the subject. And A lot of our research is very serious and talks about, experiences of like rape and sexual assaults. And this one was a lot more lighthearted and kind of just like silly conversations that people have about something really stigmatized that most people actually do in those relationships. So it was a more fun and
Yeah.
lighthearted study than some of my other researches.
Yeah. I actually remember that study. What was the title of?
I would just put a towel down.
Yeah. And how many pubs did you get from that study?
Just that one. We have some more data on it that we haven't analyzed, but the only publication directly from that. There's another one that we talk about period sex in, but it's actually from a different data set. Okay. But it wasn't specifically about period sex. It was about sort of memorable messages surrounding menstruation, and period sex was just a theme that came out of it, but it wasn't the sort of primary focus of the study.
Yeah.
And I'm forgetting the name of that article, but it was in the American Journal of Sexuality Education, and Jacqueline Gunning is the lead author on it.
What so far in your career have you been the most proud of?
I mean, I really loved our book that we put out, Communicating Intimate Health. It was a project I did with Angela Cook-Jackson over the first kind of year of COVID, and it was really a sort of time-consuming commitment, but I really enjoyed doing it as a sort of scholarly work. But probably my most proud academic experiences are more classroom and teaching experiences. I think particularly my online teaching has become a lot better in the last couple of years, and I don't think, as most of us know at this point in the last couple of years of pandemic life, isn't something that comes easily to, I think, everybody. So I feel like I've really gotten a couple of things down that weren't easy to do. So I feel quite proud of that.
So kind of off a little bit, but I know you started in journalism and then your master's was in more mass communication. What career paths have you seen other people in communication studies or your undergraduate students or graduate students pursue after graduation?
Yeah. So I teach in a social science program. So my students concentrate in communication, but they're not communication studies BAs or BSs, they're social science bachelors. So many of them go on to graduate school in a variety of disciplines, some communication or psychology. Psychology is probably the most common, or public policy sometimes. Some of them go on to work as researchers. That's a fairly common need in the area that we live in Maine. But most of them probably go on to work in nonprofits or community organizing kinds of roles. Many of them were in those kinds of roles when they started their program and just sort of move up as they get degrees. But we have a very applied social science degree, and there's a lot of coursework related to community building, community resilience, community organizing. No, I don't teach it, but they exist. And so a lot of our students are really interested in sort of using social sciences for social change. And that's sort of the type of student we tend to get in our program. And as a result, the kinds of careers they tend to go on to.
Yeah.
Graduate students I've worked with, the graduate program I'm in here at UMA is in emergency management. So they tend to go into MEMA or FEMA careers. But graduate students I've worked with in the communication studies discipline elsewhere usually go on to PhD programs afterward, although a few of them who I've worked with my lab work for public health departments as well, either simultaneously while working on their degrees, or that's their kind of end goal of the degree, as well as some folks have worked in research positions in hospitals.
Yeah, okay. It's really cool. It's a wide variety.
Yeah. Yes. I think communication degrees are wonderful because you can do so many different things with them. Yeah. I think there's a value to academic jobs and higher education, but also it's such a practical discipline that there's a lot of skills you develop that can be used in a variety of other areas.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And I know here we have students do a variety of different things too. I think maybe a few in the political sector and different things, especially in Houston. So, and a lot of advocacy and different things. Yeah. So I know you mentioned your book earlier. I want to go back to that. Can you tell me a little bit about the book that you recently published and what it's about?
Sure. Yeah. So it's an edited volume called Communicating Intimate Health, published by Rowman and Littlefield. And I co-edited it with Dr. Angela Cook-Jackson from Cal State LA. And it has too many authors for me to list them all without forgetting somebody, so I'm not going to, but there are many authors who wrote in it. All of them are wonderful. And the purpose of the book is to look at the broad kind of range of research on intimate health, which includes sexual and reproductive health, sexual communication, reproductive justice, and look at it from the lens of communication studies, which research on that field typically comes out of public health. Most commonly, there's some in sociology or other disciplines. And we thought it was valuable as these other disciplinary bodies of research really studied communication behaviors to see what was going on in kind of our discipline along the subject. And it includes a few theoretical pieces, it has a few pieces of original research, and then it has some sort of reviews and thought pieces as well. And the subjects range from birth control to border issues and reproductive justice. There's some theory pieces on memorable messages. There's some original research related to sex education. And it's, I think, a fabulous book if those are things that sound interesting to you and you would like to learn what the discipline of communication studies has to contribute and what kind of communication science has to say about communication processes in these areas.
Okay, perfect. What was your favorite part of writing the book?
Oh, let's see. I mean, I loved writing the pieces that I wrote. I think it's especially fun for folks who typically write for academic audiences and who think like, well, can I say this? Will a reviewer or an editor let me say this? To be like, I can say what I want because I am the editor. And that was sort of a fun process. But I also really love doing the kind of editor role when I review a lot for journals, but it tends to be a sort of like one-off, like I send my review and then I maybe see a revision, but I don't work with the people who are doing the writing. And it was really nice to review and edit things and get to kind of continue working with the people who wrote it to shape it into pieces that I think are all really fabulous. And so that was a fun process and a very new experience for me because I've never done kind of that sort of editing before. And it was definitely enjoyable.
And so to kind of move on to our last few questions, if you had to give advice to the next generation of communication scholars, what would it be?
I think being aware of all of the many skills that you learn in communication and being smart about marketing them as communication skills is really valuable. I also think it's helpful to think about the diversity of careers that people who have scientific or social scientific backgrounds in communication can do. And I think that most places that would be, would get something out of hiring people with communication undergraduate degrees, master's degrees, PhDs. And I hope that as the next generation of communication scholars move forth, they do a good job of sort of pitching the relevance to a variety of industries and other disciplines as well. So, I mean, I work in a interdisciplinary social science program, and I think it's really valuable to be around people with a lot of different disciplinary expertise in academic spaces, but I also think it's really valuable to take that kind of academic expertise and bring it into applied areas too. So people who can work with organizations or hospitals or government entities, I think there's a lot of value to the field of communication.
Yeah, perfect. And then related to that, where do you see the field going in the future?
I don't know, but I hope it continues to embrace kind of the interdisciplinary roots of communication. I think most of the social sciences are becoming more and more interdisciplinary. And while I think the sort of demarcation of what you're trained in is relevant, I think once you kind of leave that training, most social phenomenon by nature require multiple lenses. And I think communication is good at that in some ways because we have such an interdisciplinary history already, and so much that's already kind of embedded in how we're trained. And I hope that it's something that is continued to be embraced down the line. As far as sort of like subject matter area like that, I'm not sure I could make any predictions there, but I do think we're becoming a slightly more diverse field, and I hope that direction continues.